Hello, world historians, and welcome to week 4, module 4 of History 198, the global impact of the dual revolutions. So, by now, I have graded, and you should have your midterm essays graded and returned. So, if you do have any questions about this or about the other short writing assignment, which is due this week by Saturday at midnight, as always, please send me an email. So I'm going to go very quickly this time through this week's learning goals, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the British Empire, not because of my accent, because I'm a funny foreigner, but actually because the British Empire was, in the 19th century, during this period of the dual revolutions, did become the largest empire in world history. So number one, we're going to analyze the reasons for the rise of the British Empire from around 1750 to 1900. This is something to think about. Describing the impact of European power on colonial society. Now, note when I talk about European power, we're talking here more generally. We can talk about the French, we can talk about the Germans, the Spanish, even imperial powers during this time. It's always good to be specific. And categorizing the responses to European power around the world. So the global reaction in places as far-flung as China and Japan, but also the people who were colonized by the Europeans, the Africans and the Indians, and of course the idea of nationalism, which arises with the French Revolution, is not simply limited to European people, even though, of course, our final point, Strayer talks about the concept of the European moment in world history. So this is 1750 to 1914, up until around the time of the First World War. We could say the European moment in world history. Many people have argued that the 20th century was the American century. That was a term that was very much in vogue during the Cold War. For all we know, again, it's very hard to judge what the history is going to look like in the future. So 200 years from now, it's very possible that people will be talking about the Chinese moment in world history. But today we're going to be talking about the European, and specifically today, the British moment in world history. So I have a picture here. We're talking about the new imperialism, which comes out of this European moment. I have a couple of images that I'm going to run through, but first of all, this is a photograph, and of course you all know who this is. This is my great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria. Of course, she wasn't really my great-great-grandmother, but because I'm British, you never know if I'm joking or telling the truth. So, to go back to the point of this video, we have a couple of factors here which I want you to think about as you're reading chapters 18 and 19 for this week. Which led to the rise of the so-called new imperialism, one of which is competing European nation states, the rise of intense nationalistic ideology which came out of particularly the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars, also gives rise to a sense of prestige competition among leading powers like France, Britain, Germany, Russia. This is going to head towards ultimately the First World War. But in the meantime, it also leads to a sense in which imperialism is embraced. It's embraced wholeheartedly. If we think about the word imperialism today in 21st century America, it's often seen as being a very negative thing. You don't want to describe yourself as an imperialist. But in 19th century industrial Western nation states, imperialism was the wave of the future. This is what they wanted, to own territory, to own colonies in Africa, in Asia, in a way to demonstrate, to advertise the fact that they had advanced up the ladder of civilization. And this is also brings us to the second point, social Darwinism. You're probably all familiar with Charles Darwin, whose theories of natural selection revolutionized evolution in theory in the 19th century. But this also had unintended consequences, like much of world history. It was applied to the field of society. So not only do species and ecosystems compete with each other, so went the theory, nations, civilizations also compete, and that competition is actually part of nature and should be embraced. Now, there is another side to that, religious humanitarianism, which also informed some of this empire building and should be taken very seriously. A lot of these Victorian, British and other European Imperialists were also, trying to spread the gospel to foreign parts. They were trying to introduce what they saw as the benefits of advanced industrial civilization. And of course, imperialism in that sense is a two-edged sword. But I think at the base, we can say the most important motive was economic. If you think about the rise of the Industrial Revolution, you have manufacturing nations needing to export their manufactured goods to new markets and to expand production, this kind of cycle of economic growth. And colonies, therefore, provided both the export opportunities and, I think very importantly, the natural resources which go towards creating and sustaining this imperial empire based on industry. So, industry, imperialism, consumerism also go towards shaping this kind of ideology of the 19th century that we can see during this moment of European ascendancy. And I just thought it would be fun to show a couple of images. Sorry, I forgot I put that in there. A couple of images here which relate to the British Empire, which was described as the empire on which the sun never set, because it had territory in throughout the world in every single time zone, as you can see illustrated in this 1898 commemorative postage stamp from Canada, which, of course, if you go to Canada, they still have the Queen's head on their money. So imperialism as an ideology wasn't just something that was limited to politics, but was also part of everyday life. It was in the mindset of ordinary people in Britain who took great pride in the empire, even to the extent that grocery products, packaging, advertising, marketing was all geared towards, at this period, the mystique, the glamour of the empire, even for stuff which is kind of we might think of as pretty mundane. You probably can't tell from this image. I think it's a little bit cut off at the bottom what this is advertising, but it's actually a brand of biscuits, British biscuits, called Colonial Crackers. So you can think of the coat of arms of these various colonies of the British Empire, one flag, one empire, this propaganda being used to sell something as ordinary and mundane as biscuits. And I'm using biscuits there in the American rather than in the American sense of cookies. This is something, Epps cocoa, which had a little bit more connection to the British Empire because although cocoa was an American indigenous crop, it was grown throughout the British Empire in places like Ghana in Africa, which was a British colony. And here you can see John Bull, who is the British equivalent of Uncle Sam, sitting on top of the globe, expressing his contentment and enjoying a nice cup of hot chocolate. But I think the image which probably best illustrates the idea of empire being integrated into everyday life is this box of British biscuits by Huntley and Palmer's. Incidentally, if you ever go to Britain or perhaps even Jungle Gyms, you can still get Huntley and Palmer's biscuits, manufacturers to the Queen. That's Queen Victoria, not the Queen that we have today. And this is biscuits in the British sense, so what we would think of as cookies. And of course, this is something that would be consumed by everyday working class, middle class British consumers, and it's very much a domestic product. But it's very cleverly tied in here with the image of empire. You have these British colonial types enjoying their elephant safari. They've gone, shooting tigers, and they're stopping for a break in the jungle, enjoying their cup of tea. Of course, tea is a product of the British Empire, grown in India, and what better to have with your cup of tea than Huntley and Palmer's biscuits? So everything is all tied together there, the ideology, but also the consumer culture, the marketing. It's all quite clever and effective in the way that advertising had begun to take off in the 19th century. So we'll be reading for this week about the so-called scramble for Africa, which begins really in the middle of the 19th century, but reaches its peak around 1880s, 1884, I think, is when you have the Congress of Berlin, where the European powers sit around the map of Africa and literally carve the map up into neat little territories, which you can see illustrated on this map. Different areas controlled by different European powers. Of course, the main ones in Africa were the French and the British. But even countries like Belgium, the Belgian Congo here in 1908 was given to the Belgian government and became very notorious for some of the working conditions on the particularly the rubber plantations, where slave labor was essentially reintroduced into Africa, although essentially the fiction was that slavery had been abolished from Africa, but really unfree labor we're talking about here. And child labor, brutality that would be inflicted on some of the workers who failed to make their quotas for the week or for the month. In some extreme cases, well documented incidents of workers even having their hands cut off at the wrist. So on the extreme end, you can say certainly African colonialism has a very dark, kind of, extension of, in many ways, the Industrial Revolution into these non-European markets and colonies, which become part of this new imperialism. But this is also leading to increased competition, both for export markets, but also for colonial possessions among the European powers. You can see that competition illustrated on this map of the world. And of course, this era of dual revolutions is taking us up to 1914, where with the shot heard round the world, the beginning of the First World War, which we'll be talking about in our class next week. But the British Empire, here you can see this is what it looked like on the eve of the First World War, the Great War, as it was known to people at the time. And you can see this huge empire extending all the way across the globe from the Atlantic to the Pacific, stretching across all the different time zones. And just to finally reflect on the significance of the British Empire, again, this kind of empire had never been seen before. It would have been impossible without the engines of production in the cotton textile mills of Manchester, or the shipyards of Glasgow and Liverpool, or the great financial centre of London, which controlled much of the world's finances by 1914. So we're talking about empire industry, this era of dual revolutions beginning as these sparks and spreading into great wildfires which spread over the globe. So a lot to think about, a lot to talk about. I'm looking forward to reading your forum posts this week, and your short essay responses as well. So if you have any questions, again, send me an email, and have a good week, and I hope you enjoy the other videos. Thanks very much.